Hello and a very warm welcome to the brand new edition of Policy Watch. I'm Kriti Mishra. Today we'll take a closer look at the Draft National Education Policy 2019. The draft prepared by a committee chaired by K. Kasturi Rangan has been shared by the Ministry of Human Resource and Development for public comments. The policy aims at making India a knowledge superpower by equipping students with the necessary skills and knowledge. It also focuses on eliminating the shortage of manpower in science, technology, academics and industry. The draft policy is built on the foundational pillars of access, equity, quality, affordability and accountability. And to know more about the topic, I'm joined by Dr. Shakila T. Shamsu, OSD, New Draft Education Policy, Ministry of Human Resource and Development, Professor Saroj Sharma, former Dean, School of Education, Guru Gobind Singh, Indraprastha University, and Professor Geeta Gandhi Kingdon, Professor, University College of London, and she's joining us through Skype from Lucknow. Welcome to Rajya Sabha Television, all of you. Dr. Shakila, let me come to you first. The Extant National Policy in Education 1986, which was modified in 1992, required changes to meet the contemporary and futuristic demands of India.
Right.
Take us through the key changes proposed in this draft.
Okay. Thank you, Kriti, and also to you, Saroj. I just wanted to mention that the principles on which this policy itself has been made, I mean the approaches to the way the Draft National Education Policy 2019 has been made, in a journey of about 4 years starting from January 2015, and the culmination of it has been through the K. Kasturi Rangan Committee, which was constituted in June 2017 and which has now submitted its report to the ministry. The foundational principles, while you have said it is on the 5 foundational principles, the approaches has been one of looking at education in a continuum rather than looking at education into various subsectors by which it stands. And as a result of that, this particular policy, in comparison to previous policies, has been extremely comprehensive in its coverage of not only the school education, higher education, professional education, which includes agriculture education, legal education, medical education, and of course technical education has always been a part of higher education, and also looked at the verticals of vocational education, including teacher education and I would say research and innovation. So in a sense, the coverage of the policy has been so comprehensive. It's one of a kind which has not taken place earlier at all. Now the key takeaways that I would say in school education, if I may focus on that first, is that early childhood care and education has been sought to be integrated within the within the Ministry of Education. In fact, we are asking for a change in the nomenclature itself, yes, from the Ministry of Human Resource Development to the Ministry of Education. And the reason was that we thought that there are many sectors of education or touching upon or impacting upon education which seems to lie outside the periphery of human resource development, but is an integral part of education itself. So early childhood care for the 3 to 6 year olds or the 3 to 5 year olds which are not there right now, we want to bring 3 to 6 into school education itself. That is a major change. The other thing is we are trying to focus on certain foundational skills that children should have in what we call as a new structure of 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4.
Yes.
Now the first stage of 5 years, which we are saying will be 3 to 8 years, we call that as the foundational stage. And this foundational stage looks at discovery learning, learning by play, and would cover the 3-year-olds who are sort of going in by activity based learning. And there you would want children to actually acquire, because we have actually sort of tried to look at neurosciences to understand the brain development of children, and we have realized that this is the most critical age in which the child's brain actually develops to take on cognitive and also various other aspects which would possibly later on be very important in life. So the foundational literacy and numeracy skill is a mission mode approach that we are talking about, and for this purpose we are talking about a national tutors program, we are talking about remedial instructional aids program, and we are also talking about nutrition as being very critical to strengthen on the foundational level of 3 to 8 year olds. Then comes your preparatory stage, which is from 8 to 11, then the middle, which is from 11 to 14,
Yes.
and then the 14 to 18. So from 3 to 18, we are looking at the entire spectrum of school education as a single continuum, because we are seeing that the journey of learning for a child is not segmented. We might have segmented it for functional reasons, but for the child it is seen as one single continuum, and that is where we have tried to bring about the interconnectedness. So the restructuring, I would like to say, is more for curricular and pedagogical reasons. Right. It's not necessarily for the infrastructure part of it. And we have also said on the infrastructure part of it, given the size and complexity of our country, we have felt that, you know, the school should be looked at not as independent units alone, but as a school complex, so that there is a sharing of resources, both human and infrastructural. And there may be schools which are currently offering only up to, say, class 3 or class 5. We cannot think in terms of rejigging this whole thing, because the investment part of it would be extremely too demanding for us to really meet that. The resources would remain a constraint. Now, on the school education, we have talked about governance changes also, having a proper regulatory body, having accreditation systems. So, on school, this has been part of it, and on literacy, which falls technically within school education, we have also said that we should be able to actually achieve a fully literate society where all adults are actually literate by about 2030 or so. Now, on higher education, the main takeaways would be restructuring of the higher education system into tier 1, tier 2 and tier 3. The tier 1 is basically focused on research. The thrust would be on research, and we are hoping that within about a period of about 5 to 10 years, we would have about 150 to 300 of such institutions, where focus is purely on research to be able to match global institutions. Tier 2 would be basically teaching universities, but not without a little bit of teaching, and that would be about 2000 or so. And the last tier is the tier 3, which are purely colleges, but they will be tomorrow autonomous degree granting colleges. I can also try to complete one point. I can see that here. Yes,
go ahead.
We are talking about a massive new focus on research, for which we are trying to set up a national research foundation, and this is likely to propel research in all the subject areas, mainly focusing not just on sciences and on technology, but also on social sciences and also on humanities and other areas. And the idea is to spread the research culture at undergraduate education. And how is it that we can seed this research? Because what we find is our undergraduate education does not tend to inspire children to go in for research. So, on our research index, we tend to be very low, and we need to not only promote that. So, we are talking about actually setting aside 20,000 crores for that, and we are also saying that we will actually encourage youngsters to start taking up research projects and sort of let us say incentivizing them with some sort of awards, with some sort of projects, with some sort of recognition that they have done this kind of research. So, I would at this stage talk about these main takeaways, though I would like to subsequently come to some of our major recommendations that have come about in teacher education and to some extent in the professional education field also.
Absolutely. So, those were the key takeaways, and also the policy is very comprehensive, covering all aspects. But coming to you, Professor Sharma, the government has asserted that it is committed to promoting all languages, and there will be no imposition of any particular language, or there will be no discrimination against any language. That should allay the concerns and fears of some states.
Before answering your question, I'll go to the backdrop of this 3-language formula.
Yes, ma'am.
It has come up with the Kothari Commission recommendation after 1964. This committee report also quotes that commission's recommendation. Actually, we have conceived this idea in a very wrong way. 3-language formula was for a symbiotic relationship between the languages, because we can see a clear partition of languages between the southern languages and the northern languages, right? Kothari Commission was advocating that the students of north should study one language from south, and the southern states should learn the northern languages, including Hindi, because Hindi is widely spoken language. So, this was the idea behind this formula. But the convenience system came into our educational system also. The third language, which was ought to be having the nature of other regional language in public schools, it became foreign language, right? Third language, either French, Japanese or such kind of languages. In South, there was some agitation on imposing Hindi. Actually, imposing is not a correct word for language. Whatever has happened, the basic instinct, basic essence was to promote languages, regional languages. It was taken in a wrong way.
Right.
Now, whatever situation has come, whether you impose Hindi or not, I see a very good thing in this draft: classical languages and modern languages. Emphasis is given on promoting classical languages and also to promote regional languages. I think we should take this language criticism in that way, how we should make a symbiotic relationship between regions through languages, instead making differences through languages. Now the government has given said that is a draft, only draft, and we have to give suggestions. They have removed certain things, but still sensible people, sensible educators should sit together and give proper recommendation, give certain guidelines also to the committee and also government. I think then only a very good decision will come.
Absolutely. So that's a very important point that you're making, that
Yes.
the focus has to be on symbiotic relationship.
Yes,
Let me get in
definitely.
also Dr. Gandhi here. Dr. Gandhi, those were the salient features that Dr. Shakila mentioned for us. Now, these are progressive steps trying to bring about a paradigm shift in our education sector. But what are the roadblocks in implementation, and how can the government remove all these roadblocks and get all the stakeholders on board?
Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to start by saying that it is a very comprehensive draft of new education policy, in contrast with, for example, the TSR Subramaniam Committee's report that was less, it covered far, far less. It's very ambitious, but it's also very detailed, so that there's a much more clarity, there's much more specificity about what the committee intends to suggest. So I think that all of that will make it easier to implement the provisions of this policy, the recommendations of this policy. I think that, in what Dr. Shamsu was saying just now, she emphasized particular things. For example, she emphasized foundational learning, which I think everybody is very happy with this particular provision. I think it's understood. There's a lot of research that shows that foundational learning is extremely important. As to its integration with schooling, that part of it, there's less consensus on that. And, if you look at Europe, for example, compulsory education really only begins from age 6. In certain countries of Europe, for example, in Denmark and Finland and Germany, it begins from age 7. So I think that the jury is out on as to whether it should be made compulsory and whether it should be within the schooling context. The idea that there should be early childhood care and education, that nobody will contest, because there is absolutely very clear-cut evidence that that's really important and that should happen. What should be the site of that and what should be the content of that? And should that seek to develop literacy and numeracy skills? That bit, I think there'll be a lot of discussion on that. I'm not sure that there is so much consensus on that. At the other end, the policy is also proposing to increase the age, or rather the class of compulsory education, up to grade 12. Now, that's another question mark. Again, what the justification for increasing it up to age, effectively, if you increase it to grade 12, it means increasing it de facto to age 18 or so. So again, it's a very expensive proposition, and also, I'm not sure that there would be universal agreement on that one. Again, if you look at Europe, not that Europe is the benchmark for everything, but there needs to be some justification, which the strength of justification does not come out within the policy as to why instead of 16 as of at the moment, which is consistent with most of the rest of the world, why it needs to be 18. So that's so much on the 5+3+3+4 formula. But I do have one or two other things that I wanted to highlight, which I think are excellent provisions of the draft new education policy. Firstly, the revamping of teacher education, that was extremely important, and the new policy proposes to do that, doing away with standalone B.Ed colleges that have mostly been quite shoddy. I think that's been a very good provision. The fact that it will now be situated within universities, B.Ed college, your B.Ed provisioning will be within universities, I think that's also excellent. Of course, in implementation, coming back to your question, about the implementation roadblocks, in implementation, where is the capacity going to come from? And all of those practical issues will need to be worked out, but that needed to be done, and the policy has recommended. So that's really excellent. The other really important thing that the policy has proposed, which I think will be very beneficial, is the separation of functions of government. At the moment, the policy recognizes that at the moment there's something really quite, something that doesn't serve the purpose, which is that the government is the funder of education. It's also the operator of education, produces education, it actually arranges the resources and actually provides education. So it's funder, it's a producer, it's assessor, and it's also the regulator. Now, when these things are conflated together, these different functions, it does not run well. So I think that the policy has taken a really good step to separate out some of these functions. So the government will now still be funder and operator, but it will not be the regulator. And assessor part, I'm not very clear, it did not come across clearly whether the government will continue to be assessor, for example, through exam boards, through the National Achievement Survey and state achievement surveys and so on. I think one question about implementation of this, however, is the following. When you talk about government no longer being the regulator and there being a separate state regulatory authority, school regulatory authority, which is a very good thing to do. What's not very clear, it's not very specific, or what, at the moment, what it's saying is that the terms of reference of this, regulatory body are going to be that it's going to do accreditations and it's going to act as a, tribunal, if need be, in order to decide whether schools should be, their accreditation should be taken away or their recognition be taken away. That's one part of regulation.
Right, Professor Gandhi.
Just one last point, which is really important.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Sorry?
Go ahead, ma'am.
Can I just, what I want to make the point is that, look, all of us know that school education is not delivering the goods at the moment. We know that learning achievement levels have not been happening. So the draft NEP has got a range of provisions. I think this is an excellent provision. But what it fails to do, it doesn't go far enough. When it talks about this regulatory body, it needs to also say how it's going to regulate the government schools. Now, the policy has a really good intent, because later on in the policy, it talks about how regulation of government and private schools should not be different. It should be one seamless thing. So I think that's an excellent thing. Now, it just needs to apply that principle to the state school regulatory body, whereby the regulatory body should also be perhaps looking into the accreditation of government schools and making sure that government schools also answer. And maybe I'd love to hear from Dr. Shamsu on this.
Right, we'll take that to her. Dr. Shakila, of course, we're talking about implementation and consensus here. We understand that Ministry of Human Resource and Development will hold a meeting with all the state education ministers on 22nd of June in the national capital. How do you plan to build consensus on this draft?
No, so I think you should understand that right from the beginning of this entire exercise of formulating a new education policy, which has now been brought out as the Draft National Education Policy 2019, it has been through citizen engagement, which is a deviation from the past, where we've never taken on board the common man's views on education. And education is a particular theme which touches the lives of each and every household, because there is someone or the other who's actually having a brush with education. Now, that being the principle by which we followed, and I'm not too sure whether this, whether Professor Geeta is also aware that we really started with, inviting suggestions on an online platform called MyGov, where we had something like 39,000 suggestions over a period from 26th of January to 31st of October 2015. We also did a massive grassroots level consultations, again by going down to actual village level, where you'd be surprised to know that we had about 1,10,000 villages, some 6,000 odd blocks. We were actually consulting them. Of course, 6,000 blocks did not respond to us. We had written to all, we have taken up, thematic questions addressed for village, block, the district, the urban local bodies and the state level. Across this entire verticals, both for school and higher, on the 33 themes that we had initially identified, you had a voluminous, nature of suggestions, which have then gone into feeding into the TSR Subramaniam report, then the ministry's draft inputs, and then this particular committee itself. So consensus building has been an ongoing process through this entire exercise, and it is always by inviting suggestions. So this draft national education policy has been uploaded not only on the Ministry of Human Resource Development website on mhrd.gov.in. It is also there on MyGov platform, and where also we are inviting suggestions. The consultation with the state governments is natural because education falls into the concurrent list, and in a federal setup, the state and the union government are equal partners in the exercise of implementing the policies on the ground level. So this consultation, we hope, along with the Government of India ministries, we have also written to them. So all the stakeholders are actually being consulted, whether they are common people, whether they are academic institutions, whether they are state governments, whether they are Government of India ministries. All people have been asked to give in their suggestions, views and inputs, so that there is a consensus built around it.
Absolutely.
Ultimately, we would like a policy which is finally being adopted, which actually voices the views of every single stakeholder in this country, rather than try to do something which seems to be a standalone exercise.
So there have been wide consultations and deliberations.
Right.
But talking about school education, and Professor Gandhi, I'd like to come to you on this. The policy also talks about extending RTE, or right to education, to cover children from 3 to 18 years. Right now, it covers children up to 14 years. What kind of impact would it have on our school education system?
Well, as I said before, I think it's a really good provision to have children of the age of 3, 4, and 5 also attended to, their learning needs attended to, and the great potential for the development of the mind, the brain, the creative aspects, and so forth, and also nutritional development, the development that can happen in the brain because of good nutrition. All of those opportunities exist at age 3, 4, and 5, which should be strengthened tremendously. My question is whether it should be located within the school, and whether one of the aims of it should also be the promotion of literacy and numeracy in those years. And that is where I think the jury is out, and I think there needs to be discussion. Of course, to practically implement it, there would also need to be a constitutional amendment. Constitutional Amendment of 2002, 86 Constitutional Amendment already fixed 6 years as the lower limit for compulsory schooling. If we are going to make schooling compulsory for ages 3, 4, and 5, then there will need also to be a constitutional amendment. So there would need to be widespread consensus around that. The second issue, as I said, is for post-compulsory education. At the moment, compulsory education has been up to roughly age 16. With grade 12, with it going to grade 12, I think there's a real issue about, not only the resourcing, but also the desirability of it. I'm not sure that there is going to be a total consensus about whether that is necessarily the right way to do. It's focusing more on quantity rather than quality. To my mind, and seeing the realities of education in the country at the moment, what really needs to happen is the deepening and betterment of what is already on offer, making education up to grade 16 really good quality, making it such that it delivers not only basic literacy and numeracy, which it's failing to do even that at the moment. But
absolutely,
really,
Professor Gandhi, you're making a very important point, and we'll also talk about higher education here. And Professor Sharma, the policy also talks about National Scholarship Fund.
Yes.
To financially support students for higher education. How important is this move for making higher education more affordable in the country?
See, this policy clearly talks about school education as well as higher education. There are two parts. When we talk about school education, there are many policies for scholarship and such other kind of things. One thing I want to make it clear, this policy talks about the elementary education talks about 6 to 14 years, right? This committee has also talked about 3 years, 3 to 6 years, that early childhood care education. One suggestion from my side is natal and prenatal studies, because this has been part of our culture from the time of Abhimanyu to still a few universities, good universities are also running in Gujarat. I remember one university that is running natal and prenatal studies. In school education, scholarships are there. This committee has rightly come to the scholarship provision for higher education, underprivileged students, and EW scheme is already there in few universities. We hope that this provision, this should be welcome, and that should come into fore with clear policy implementation. One thing, as Professor was telling about the higher education and school education scenario, when we talk about teacher education, we need very good teachers in schools, right? This committee has given very good recommendation for teacher education, because I belong to this area. There are certain norms for B.Ed. Committee talks about MA education and M.Ed, professional courses and liberal courses. These are the two things. There has been long debate for MA education and M.Ed. This committee has talked a lot about B.Ed, but M.Ed was given less importance, or I think the things have been left down. MA education and M.Ed has been a long debate in this area. Today itself, I was having a word with one Professor Sunil Singh of BHU. He suggested that government should think over Masters of Teacher Education instead of M.Ed, because MA is also MA Education and M.Ed Master of Education, both are same. Debate is for their professional aspect. If we need a good teachers, then there should be very good teacher training institution also, because M.Ed is a postgraduate institution, and this committee talks about School of Education in central universities, different universities. So such kind of thing there must have some clarity. One is for physical education, another is special education. There is a big debate between what kind of PhD degree should university must give. Some institutions, some university deny for giving PhD in physical education under the aegis of education discipline, right? Special education, there is still some debate on special education, PhD in special education should be given in university or not. So these kind of clarity should also be there, along with your question that
Absolutely.
Scholarship should be there, and this report also talks about scholarship to the teachers.
And you also made a very important point that professional
Yes.
training of teachers is absolutely important.
Needed.
Thank you so much for joining us on this discussion. I'm completely out of time. So the path-breaking reforms will bring about a paradigm shift by empowering our students, teachers and educational institutions. That's all we had for you in this edition. Thanks for watching and stay tuned to Rajya Sabha Television.